Hey guys, this is John from Guerilla News. Today I'm going to be talking about why I believe there won't be a financial collapse. And this is from an article I wrote September 5th, 2017, entitled Why There Won't Be a Financial Collapse. So I've been a prepper since 1995, followed all the government goings on, conspiracy theories, end of the world theories, economic woes, and the like. There have definitely been some doozies during that time. The ones I've always felt are most likely, especially in the last 10 years or so, is the financial collapse. I'm not any kind of economic expert. I've just watched a lot of news, listened to a lot of traders, former traders, and experts, or so-called experts, talk about what's going on. That being said, there is no way our economy should still be moving the way it is. Why? Well, here's some simple stats, and I've rounded these numbers off. The total U.S. national debt is $20 trillion. The U.S. federal budget deficit, $685 billion. The total U.S. credit card debt, $962 billion. Total student loan debt, federal and private, $833 billion. Total U.S. car loan debt, a whopping $1.19 trillion. Total U.S. population right now, 325,785,385. Total on food stamps, 40,974,836. The total U.S. dollars in circulation is only $727 billion. Now that's pretty incredible. We don't even have the money in circulation to pay the debt that's owed. There's no way that's ever going to be paid off. It doesn't take a mathematician to figure that out. And there is no way this can continue to go up and out of control like it is. Any idiot should be able to figure that out. No business or home could survive on spending and budgeting like this. So what makes us think that an entire country, for that matter the entire world, can run the show this way? The entire world is in the same boat. Every country is running deficits like this. Everything is borrowed and on credit. Our stock market is more than likely manipulated and is being propped up by the Fed pumping cash into it and companies buying their own stocks. Gold and silver prices, we know, are being manipulated and suppressed. So why can't the Fed just have another round of QE, quantitative easing? Well, here's some information on QE 1, 2, 3, and 4 from an article entitled The Balance, What is Quantitative Easing? Definition and Explanation. So this article, What is Quantitative Easing? Definition and Explanation, subtitled How Central Banks Create Massive Amounts of Money. It's from a website called The Balance. It was written by Kimberly Amadeo, June 15, 2017. So in this article it says the definition of quantitative easing is a massive expansion of the open market operations of a central bank. It's used to stimulate the economy by making it easier for businesses to borrow money. The bank buys securities from its member banks to add liquidity to capital markets. This has the same effect as increasing the money supply. In return, the central bank, issues credit to the bank's reserves to buy the securities. Where do central banks get the credit to purchase these assets? They simply create it out of thin air. Well, there's a shock. Only central banks have this unique power. This is what people are referring to when they talk about the Federal Reserve printing money. The purpose of this type of expansionary monetary policy is to lower interest rates and spur economic growth. Lower interest rates allow banks to make more loans. Bank loans stimulate demand by giving businesses money to expand. They give shoppers credit to purchase more goods and services. By increasing the money supply, QE keeps the value of the country's currency low. This makes the country's stocks more attractive to foreign investors. It also makes exports cheaper. Japan was the first to use QE from 2001 to 2006. It restarted in 2012 with the election of Shinzo Abe as Prime Minister. For more, you can see a link on the article called Japan's Economy. The most successful QE effort was undertaken by the U.S. Federal Reserve, it added almost $2 trillion to the money supply. That's the largest expansion from any economic stimulus program in history. As a result, the debt on the Fed's balance sheet doubled from $2.106 trillion in November 2008 to $4.486 trillion in October 2014. The European Central Bank adopted QE in January 2015 after 7 years of austerity measures. It agreed to purchase $60 billion in euro-denominated bonds, lowering the value of the euro and increasing exports. It increased those purchases to 80 billion euros a month. In December 2016, it announced it would taper its purchases to 60 billion a month in April 2017. For more information on this, you can see links in the article called Euro to Dollar Conversion and ECB Surprises by Tapering Its Bond Buying Program by CNBC, December 8, 2016. The Federal Reserve quantitative easing explained, also in this article, from the balance. How does quantitative easing work? The Fed adds credit to the bank's reserve accounts in exchange for mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. The asset purchases are done by the trading desk at the New York Federal Reserve Bank. The reserve requirement is the amount the banks must have on hand each night when they close their books. The Fed requires that banks hold around 10% of deposits either in cash in the bank's vaults or at the local Federal Reserve Bank. When the Fed adds credit, it gives the banks more than they need in reserves. The bank then seeks to make a profit by lending the excess to other banks. The Fed also lowered the interest rate banks charge. This is known as the Fed funds rate. It is the basis for all other interest rates. Quantitative easing also stimulates the economy in another way. The federal government auctions off large quantities of treasuries to pay for expansionary fiscal policy. As the Fed buys treasuries, it increases demand, keeping treasury yields low. Since treasuries are the basis for all long-term interest rates, it also keeps auto, furniture, and other consumer debt rates affordable. The same is true for corporate bonds, making it cheaper for businesses to expand. Most important, it keeps long-term fixed interest mortgage rates low. That's important to support the housing market. Before the recession, the Fed held between 700 and 800 billion of treasury notes on its balance sheet, varying the amount to tweak the money supply. QE1, December 2008 to June 2010. At the November 25, 2008 FOMC meeting, the Fed announced it would purchase $800 billion in bank debt, U.S. Treasury notes, and mortgage-backed securities from member banks. The Fed started quantitative easing to combat the financial crisis of 2008. It had already dramatically lowered the Fed funds rate to effectively zero. Its other monetary policy tools were also maxed out. The discount rate was near zero. The Fed even paid interest on banks' reserves. By 2010, the Fed bought $175 million in MBS that had been originated by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the Federal Home Loan Banks. It also bought $1.25 trillion in MBS that had been guaranteed by the mortgage giants. Initially, the purpose was to help banks by taking these subprime MBS off their balance sheet. In less than 6 months, this aggressive purchasing program had more than doubled the central bank's holdings. Between March and October 2009, the Fed also bought $300 billion of long-term treasuries, such as 10-year notes. The Fed halted purchases in June 2010 because the economy was growing again. Just 2 months later, the economy started to falter. So the Fed renewed the program. It bought $30 billion a month in long-term treasuries to keep its holdings at around $2 trillion. Quantitative easing 2, November 2010 to June 2011. On November 3, 2010, the Fed announced it would increase quantitative easing by buying $600 billion of Treasury securities by the end of the second quarter of 2011. Operation Twist was September 2011 to December 2012. In September 2011, the Fed launched Operation Twist. This was similar to QE2 with 2 exceptions. First, the Fed's short-term Treasury bills expired. It bought long-term notes. Second, the Fed stepped up its purchases of MBS. Both twists were designed to support the sluggish housing market. QE3, September 2012 to October 2014. On September 13, 2012, the Fed announced QE3. It agreed to buy $40 billion in MBS and continue Operation Twist, adding a total $85 billion of liquidity a month. The Fed did 3 other things that it had never done before. Announced it would keep the Fed funds rate at 0 until 2015. Said it would keep purchasing securities until jobs improved substantially. And acted to boost the economy, not just avoid a contraction. QE4, January 2013 to October 2014. In December 2012, the Fed announced it would buy a total of $85 billion in long-term treasuries and MBS. It ended Operation Twist, instead just rolling over the short-term bills. It clarified its direction by promising to keep purchasing securities until one of two conditions were met. Either unemployment would fall below 6.5% or inflation would rise above 2.5%. Since QE4 is really just an extension of QE3, some people still refer to it as QE3. Others call it QE infinity because it didn't have a definite end date. The end of QE. On December 18, 2013, the FOMC announced it would begin tapering its purchases as its three economic targets were being met. The unemployment rate was at 7%, GDP growth was between 2 and 3%, and the core inflation rate hadn't exceeded 2%. The FOMC would keep the Fed funds rate and the discount rate between 0 and 1/4 points until 2015 and below 2% through 2016. Sure enough, on October 29, 2014, the FOMC announced it had made its final purchase. Its holdings of securities had doubled from $2.1 trillion to $4.5 trillion. It would continue to replace these securities as they came due to maintain its holdings at those levels. On June 14, 2014, the FOMC announced it would begin reducing, that's June 14, 2015. The FOMC, it's going to be June 14, 2017. There's a typo in this article. The FOMC announced how it will begin reducing its QE holdings. It will allow $6 billion of treasuries to mature each month without replacing them. Each following month, it will allow another $6 billion to mature until it's retiring $30 billion a month. The Fed will follow a similar process with its holdings of mortgage-backed securities. It will retire an additional $4 billion a month until it reaches a plateau of $20 billion a month being retired. This change won't occur until the Fed funds rate reaches 2%. So did quantitative easing work? Quantitative easing achieved some of its goals, missed others completely, and created several asset bubbles. First, it removed toxic subprime mortgages from banks' balance sheets, restoring trust and therefore banking operations. Second, it helped to stabilize the U.S. economy, providing the funds and the confidence to pull out of the recession. Third, it kept interest rates low enough to revive the housing market. Fourth, it stimulated economic growth, although probably not as much as the Fed would have liked. That's because it didn't achieve the Fed's goal of making more credit available. It gave money to the banks, but they sat on the funds instead of lending them out. That's a shocker. Banks used the funds to triple their stock prices through dividends and stock buybacks. In 2009, they had their most profitable year ever. Of course, right after we're all suffering, right? The large banks also consolidated their holdings. Now the largest 0.2% of banks control more than 70% of bank assets. That's why QE didn't cause widespread inflation, as many had feared. If banks had lent out their money, businesses would have increased operations and hired more workers. This would have fueled demand, driving up prices. Since that didn't happen, the Fed's measurement of inflation, the core CPI, stayed below the Fed's 2% target. Instead of inflation, QE created a series of asset bubbles. In 2011, commodities traders turned to gold, driving its price per ounce from $869.75 in 2008 to $1,895. In 2012, investors turned to U.S. Treasuries, driving the yield on the 10-year note to a 200-year low. In 2013, investors fled out of the Treasuries and into the stock market, driving the Dow up 24%. This followed Ben Bernanke's announcement on June 19th that the Fed was considering tapering. That threw bond investors into a panic selling spree. As demand for bonds fell, interest rates spiked 75% in 3 months. As a result, the Fed held off the actual taper until December, giving the markets a chance to calm down. In 2014 and 15, the value of the dollar rose 25% as investors created an asset bubble in U.S. dollars. This is the opposite of what's supposed to happen with QE, but the U.S. dollar is a global currency and a safe haven. Investors flocked to it despite high supply, making this one area that turned okay despite the QE not working as intended. The Fed did what it was supposed to do. It created credit for the financial markets when liquidity was severely constrained, but it couldn't overcome contractionary fiscal policy. Between 2010 and 14, Tea Party Republicans gained control of the House of Representatives. They insisted on budget cuts when the economy was not yet on its feet. They threatened a default on the national debt in 2011 and initiated a 10% spending sequester. They created a government shutdown in 2013. The Fed also could not force banks to lend. Its strategy of adding money to the system was like pushing a string. It created bubbles in other asset classes without getting needed funds to households and businesses. So does it sound like this is something we can do a round 5 of? There's no way we can print any more money to cover this. We can't even cover what they've done to date. So if our economy is going down the toilet, and it is, and the market is just a big fraud, and it is, why do I think there won't be a collapse? Because the entire world is in the sinking ship. Maybe our governments don't always get along, and maybe a lot of that is just for show, much the way our Republicans and Democrats pretend to not get along, but at the end of the day, they're generally for the same outcomes. Our world leaders do not want to see any kind of financial collapse either. If one starts here, it's going to quickly spread to the other countries, and everyone will go down. Completely. They're going to ride in on their white horse and offer to wipe out all our debt. If you just go along with switching to electronic currency, some type of Fed coin, debit card, chip, who knows, but cash will go by the wayside. They will be able to track every single thing you purchase and tax you for it if they wish. They will have full control of your funds, and if you are allowed to have access to them or not. Of course, they will claim reasons of security and fraud and ease of use to get us to all go along with this. Couple this with the 5G plans the FCC has for chipping everything you own, refrigerators, ovens, toilets, everything. Able to automatically charge you per use of things in your own house. Billions of chips, in the chairman's own words. The picture that's featured on my article is the 1988 cover of The Economist magazine, and it's titled Get Ready for a World Currency. And it has a coin around the phoenix neck with the year 2018 on it, and I'm sure most of you have seen it. People thought that was maybe a gold coin or something, but it looks a lot like the way Bitcoin and other e-coins are represented. Coincidence? As a former investigator, I firmly believe there's no such thing. This has been in the works for years. It's going to happen. World governments all want to switch to electronic currency. In a recent article from August 31st, 2017, it talks about 6 global banks joining forces to create a digital currency. So obviously this is coming, and I guess the answer to the question of how it comes to fruition remains to be seen. But even since I wrote this article at the end of summer, a lot's changed in the cryptocurrency market. Bitcoin has had huge gains and some losses, and you've got all these new cryptocurrencies coming on the market. I think world governments don't really know what to do with it. You've got some governments that are starting to put regulations on it, and others are still just, I think, sitting back and waiting to see what happens before they make their move into cryptocurrency as well. So does this mean that I think there won't be any kind of financial collapse? No, not necessarily. I think there very possibly could be some type of financial crisis, maybe similar to 2008, but I don't think they're going to let it get any more out of hand than that before they step in and save the world with their, e-coin or whatever they decide to do. I just don't believe there's going to be this financial armageddon that a lot of people talk about. I just don't see how they're going to let that happen. It will affect too many countries and too many people, and it'll affect the rich people, and they're just not going to let that happen. This e-coin and all digital is going to be their answer to having full control. You won't be able to make any cash payments. You won't be able to make any payments on anything that the government doesn't know about. And if they want to lock you out or keep you from buying, they'll be able to do it with the stroke of a button. And, you know, this is already happening in China. I listened to a report just last night about a Chinese reporter who reported on something they didn't like, and he has no access. He cannot use his funds. He cannot leave the country. Can't buy an airplane ticket. Can't ride on certain trains. You know, this is coming. So, you know, if you want to make private financial purchases, you won't be able to do it. You know, and if they want to charge you for flushing your toilet, they'll be able to do that too. We'll be taxed on everything. So yeah, digital would be, you know, convenient, I suppose, you know, but you need to think about the other alternatives, the other problems that arise with using digital. And is it really worth it? I mean, now is the time for us to do something about it before it gets completely out of hand. So, just something to think about. Well, as always, guys, thank you for listening. I'm curious what your guys' take on this might be, or what you think could happen, so leave comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this article. And you can find me over on Twitter at Guerilla News, and on my WordPress website, guerrillanewsblog.wordpress.com. Thanks for listening.
Is that 5G will use much higher frequency bands than previously thought viable for mobile broadband and other applications. Such millimeter wave signals have physical properties that are both a limitation and a strength. They tend to travel best in narrow and straight lines, and they do not go through physical objects as well. But brilliant engineers have developed new antennas that can aim and amplify signals. Now, to make this work, the 5G build-out is going to be very infrastructure intensive, requiring massive deployment of small cells. I'm confident that the actions will lead to a cornucopia of unanticipated, innovative uses, and will generate tens of billions of dollars in economic activity. And that's damn important, because it means that U.S. companies will be the first out of the gate. And that is why 5G is a national priority. And stay out of the way of technological development. Unlike some countries, we do not believe that we should spend the next couple of years studying what 5G should be or how it should operate. The future has a way of inventing itself. Turning innovators loose is far preferable to expecting committees and regulators to define the future. We won't wait for the standards. We're already seeing the industry gearing up to seize this opportunity. Verizon and AT&T tell us they'll begin deploying 5G trials in 2017, and the first commercial deployments they're talking about are expected in 2020. And we're not done. As part of our July 14 action, we also plan to ask for comments on opening up other high-frequency bands. Many of the high-frequency bands that we will make available for 5G currently have some satellite users, as well as some Defense Department applications, or at least the possibility of future satellite and defense users. This means sharing will be required between satellite and terrestrial wireless, an issue that is especially relevant in the 28 gigahertz band. But if anyone tells you that they know the details of what 5G is going to become, run the other way. If something can be connected, it will be connected. Hundreds of billions of microchips connected in products from pill bottles to plant waterers. We must reject the notion that the 5G future will be the sole provenance of urban areas. The 5G revolution will touch all corners of our country. A lot more antenna siting decisions by local governments, and tightened our shot clock for siting application reviews. America's local governments will play an important role in determining how we fulfill this national priority.